what's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. But first, they have to find them. What's here. What's here. What's here. What's here.
Three, two, and we are live. Welcome back into the Placemakers Podcast. You are joining me at my favorite time of the week. It's when I get to hang out with my friends who are cooler and smarter than your friends to talk about the future of higher education. Today, our Placemakers are Kelsey Harmon-Finn, the CEO of NACIS, and Matt Stein. Matt Stein, we get to hear from every week on the wrap-up, and now our viewers who are tuning in live get to see your beautiful mustache live, which is a wonderful thing. And we're talking a little bit about things beyond the classroom today. I appreciate you both being here. Cheers to you both. I want to jump right in and talk about this idea of differentiation a little bit. We talked a little bit earlier in the week, and every campus, it seems, is going to have to come out on the other side of this, sort of differentiating and figuring out what it is that they're going to be in higher education. And I wonder if beyond the classroom, there's a real opportunity to do that. Because as we look around college campuses around the United States, particularly, there are a lot of the same types of experiences, right? There's a Chick-fil-A on every campus. There's a Starbucks on every campus. And I'm generalizing, but there's a lot of that. And it strikes me that there's a lot of barrier to entry for differentiation. And I want to talk about that a little bit, hear a little bit about that. And Stein, really, maybe, is that the sense? Is it challenging to have differentiation from an outside the classroom perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things about retail is the authentic experience that it provides for consumers, and it allows for people to engage with a product or a staff member who communicates something that's beyond what may be the campus experience through a physical place where you're getting a product that's unique to that, whether it's region, geography, or to the actual campus experience. And so something like a Starbucks, which is an iconic global
Mhm.
brand that everyone recognizes, it's a beacon in airports for travelers. It provides that warm blanket experience if you are a coffee lover. One of the things that can differentiate is the coffee experience. And so you lean into the third wave coffee roaster that's local that otherwise someone may not be as familiar with. And when we talk about coffee, for those who love coffee, which, right, many of us do, you no one walks past Starbucks to go to another Starbucks is the example we always
Mm.
use. But people will walk past the Starbucks to go to that local or more nuanced coffee operator. And that level of differentiation can be really unique. You think about some of these institutions, huge traditional land grants, tremendous out of state student populations. You're flying into a town, think about Tuscaloosa, Alabama, right?
Yeah.
You can't fly to Tuscaloosa. So, you fly into Birmingham, you hop in the car, you drive for 90 minutes through Alabama, and now all of a sudden you're getting to this beautiful campus. You're super excited. And the first coffee experience on campus may be a Starbucks. That's not a positive or negative, but it's not a differentiating component of the retail environment. So that's something that I think institutions are currently leaning into and trying to find a way to share some of the specialness as it relates to both their local community and the local industry, and then support people within that community. But I do think there's a real challenge as it relates to just the bureaucracy of it.
Right.
How do you, if you're a small business and you have 2 units, how do you even recognize that opportunity, and how can we do a better job of creating those opportunities for small businesses?
Well, and I mean, you're striking at sort of the core of what a lot of this podcast has become. We started with talking about placemaking in terms of different entities on campus, and it's really turned into things that I think we need to stop doing, right? To some
Mm,
extent. And one of the things you're sort of hitting at is that bureaucracy. And we talked about this a little bit, that bureaucracy comes in the form of institutional standards that may be prohibitive. That bureaucracy comes in the form of procurement challenges that may be a little bit prohibitive. How do we undo some of that or get around
whew. Well, I'm not
that?
going to answer your question directly,
That's
but I think
okay.
a
You don't have
couple
to.
thoughts, a couple thoughts on what you just shared is it's more around how do we share the space, right? So I think for so long we got into this trap of there needs to be one vendor, we get the most amount of money and give them all the space so they have all of the resources, and now it's how are we sharing space, and how are
Mhm.
we creating a community that has options and choice. um, so to go to your question about the bureaucracy, I think it's also how do you bring people along? How are we going out and finding those companies and bringing them in? How are you, as a campus, understanding the community and the culture that you are a part of, and welcoming that into your campus and bringing that into campus? So the kind of the the border between community and campus becomes less, so that you're flowing, um, from a retail perspective or whatever that might look like. To your point, there could be a Starbucks on the corner, so do you need one on campus at that corner? So how are you looking at the community at large? And then how are you looking at your procedures, processes, um, your decision making related to who
Yeah.
comes on campus? Because if
Right.
you put an RFP out there and then your decision making process is all based on who you're going to make the most amount of money from, you're never going to have those brands show up.
Right.
You're never going to have the
Right.
smaller mom and pops on campus, right? So what's your priority in how you're picking the
And you're
brands on
reading my
campus?
mind. I was going to say, if we're making decisions based on revenue alone, is it going to keep us from making good differentiation decisions, or good decisions that'll be longer term greater goods? And what are those other things that we ought to be keeping in mind as we're making some of those decisions? Kelsey, the other day, I thought it was brilliant. You talked about this notion of social and cultural differences and those being the sort of leads on decision making. Can you talk about that a little bit? I think that's just a fascinating sort of shift in the paradigm.
So I think we're starting to see it even as campuses are trying to determine the best way to come back to campus in the fall.
Yeah.
So, what are your priorities? How are you determining them? I mean, we can talk about the California State University system
Mhm.
deciding online, 23 campuses. That's a choice, and that
Yeah.
makes a statement, right? And so that makes a statement financially, what you're choosing to do and how that impacts today. And then what does that mean for the long term and how students are choosing where they go to college, and are they picking it based on choices that campuses are making today? And not all students maybe agree with that choice, right? Not all future
Yeah.
students, and some do. And so, how are we really deciding what the priorities are and then standing behind those? And then making sure our students in the community feel safe and secure in whatever decisions that we make. Because I think no matter what decision you make, come back to school, bring half your students back, limit residence halls to one person per room, test everyone because you have the funding to do it. Whatever decisions they are, the student and the community needs to feel safe when they're walking onto your campus
Yeah.
community,
And you're
right?
hitting on that notion of psychological safety that we talked about a few episodes ago, that, part of this is the science and the logistics behind the science of how you make decisions. And the other part is about psychological safety. And I think you're touching on that, which is great. Do you think, um, one of the words you used the other day that I thought was really critical as it relates to decision making, and I think you were referencing Generation Z specifically, is making authentic decisions, making
Yep.
decisions that align with what your authentic values are. Do you think there's a chasm between students and what they find to be authentic, and parents who are often paying the bills in terms of some of the decision making?
Mm, it's a
I,
great question.
I mean,
I,
generationally.
I I think that there's a difference between anyone and even between different students.
Yeah.
There's going to be a differentiation, right? That's not going to be limited just by whether it's a parent or a student or a faculty or a staff or an alumni, right? That differentiation exists for everyone. I think the opportunity there is for the institution to really talk about who they are and help communicate
Mhm.
that through their processes and procedures. And Kelsey's point earlier about a system deciding to shut down, that's going to have long time horizon impacts for how students, faculty, and staff engage with that system on a going forward basis. And a decision like that is going to impact folks that are in middle school today in terms of what
Yeah.
they identify with these institutions. And that, I think, that more than anything else is really what we're going to see come out of some of these decisions. It's going to help people identify better before they set foot on campus. Is that a place where I'm going to feel safe and that my core values are identified by the
Mm.
institution? This is a great opportunity for institutions to step up and really communicate who they are as an institution across all levels of what they do, whether it's academic, whether it's student fees, like we heard about from the students on the pod last week, right?
Yeah.
All those things are relevant, and everyone has a touch point with it today differently than they did 6 months or a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wonder if higher ed for too long has played to the middle for a long, long, long time. We talked
100%.
about, right, the bell curve, and we said, the differentiation, the winners are going to be the people that are the outliers on the bell curve moving forward. And for now, it seems like everybody's been aiming at that middle target, and everybody's been a little bit of a follower. And so when the Cal system comes out and says we're going to do this thing and becomes a leader, they may be a winner in that. Who knows? Because they're actually saying, here's what we stand for, here's what we're going to do. You want to get on board with it, get on board with it. It's really, really interesting. Kelsey, I want to talk a little bit more about this notion of, you talked about the community and the campus and bringing the outside in. And so I'm interested, do you think this calls for a whole different level of sort of integration on a campus? I struggle with this idea of campus being this insular, really safe place for students to experiment and to fail, and it also being a place that prepares people for the real world in connection with and outside of the university. And so what does that mean for the way that we need to integrate things on
Hmm.
campus or not moving forward?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity. So even sticking with the whole authentic way in which you're showing up. So there's this extreme, the CSU is doing one thing, but there's another campus saying, we're going to be open and
Purdue.
all students are welcome, right? So let's go. And so I think when you talk about authenticity, it's how do you not waver? It's like we made this decision and you might pivot and change a little bit, but how do you stay true to those core values and direction? And so I agree with you that, and I agree with this idea that campus is a safe place for students to come, try, fail, learn,
Yeah.
try again. But then I think if they're real clear about their priorities, so then the corporate business partners that are coming in and partnering with them, how are they real clear about matching priorities? And
Mm.
so is there a trial and error opportunity with corporations in a way that's safe on campus, right? So I think this Saxby model, when we talk about um, the student CEO, right? The student for a semester or longer, maybe it's a little longer, right? They're running the coffee shop from beginning
Yeah.
to end. They're accountable for it. It's bringing, and Saxby's is a part of that whole community. It's not just the campus that they're on, right? They're doing it
Yeah.
from a regional perspective of how they're contributing to society. And
Do you
so,
think that's the new model moving forward? That this notion of integration to that level. And for listeners who haven't heard of Saxby's, check them out. They're a very, very cool company who has really integrated into the higher ed market in a way where they're not just selling coffee. They're doing situated learning and apprenticeship and really focused on the student work experience in a way that is unique and novel and that you don't see with other corporate entities on campus that are only focused on being the big revenue play. But do you think
yeah,
that's it? Do you think that's where we go?
I hope. I really do. I mean, I think this idea of internships or you have a marketing internship, that's great. But how are they really learning the ins and outs of the business? How are they taking this instructional learning from the classroom and making it experiential? And I mean, to me, I would love to even see it go into, city government. I mean, you see Berkeley, the students there petitioned and they have a student seat on the board, the
Yeah.
city governance board. So it's like, how are you integrating in ways that the campus can show up in support of and for students, but also companies are actually preparing their future workforce in a more tangible way? Why
Yeah.
not?
Brandon Busteed, he's going to be on the pod in a couple of weeks, and he talks an awful lot about the nature of work and sort of this notion of higher education sort of being flipped in the future, and that people will no longer go to school to get a job; they'll get a job to go to school. And he talks about situated learning, and he talks about the dismantling of the career center, and he talks about instead of sabbaticals, faculty going out and getting real life work experience and bringing that back into the classroom. All these different sort of ideas about where work sits in relationship to the institution. Saying all that, Matt, the retail market better than anybody, particularly in higher education. Are retailers ready for that model shift away from really being focused on revenue and being more focused on integration?
Especially in light of the situation we're in today, I think they're ready to be more flexible than they have been in the past. I
Yeah.
think we're entering into a new age of flexibility when it relates to the business planning and business modeling for every entity, higher ed, retail, all of these different groups, because the reality of what the world is going to look like is very different from what people have been used to. And so I think it's very much going to be something that groups are responsive to and comfortable with, and looking for ways to drive both new locations and also revenue. And one of the things in higher ed that we talk about is the consumer base, right? You've got this huge population of individuals that are making independent decisions. When we're talking about undergraduate students, who are making independent decisions for their first time on their own, who are spending money in a unique way. They're creating brand loyalty in a way that otherwise they may not have been. And so when you think about that from the other side, from the businesses that are serving them or want to serve them, being able to be on a campus allows for a level of relationship that otherwise may not exist. And it does really two things, right? It's individuals identify with retail because they aspire to engage with that brand, or because they identify core values with that brand. Those are two of the real big drivers in terms of why people engage with retail. And so to be able to bring that to a campus where, going back to what we were talking about, it meets the needs of the individuals, but it also meets the core values of the individuals. And there's a mesh there between the retail brand and the institution. There's a really great opportunity. And I think people will be interested in that. One quick note, a lot of what we talk about here is about the undergraduate student
Yeah,
population,
right.
right? We're talking about how are we serving these students? How are we serving, the Saxby's experiential learning model is great because it's educating, giving real world work skills. I think one of the things we need to be thinking about is the institution's role in these communities. I mean, these institutions are major anchors within their communities. They're serving a population way above and beyond their incoming freshman class to their graduating seniors. They're serving people beyond faculty, staff, administration, and the value that these institutions bring to these communities is tremendous. They're providing health services, all of the intangibles that go along with it. And Kelsey organization really operates on the education outside the classroom on a
Right.
college campus. And I think a lot of those things that these institutions provide for these communities need to be focused on coming out of this, because that's really where there's going to be a moment in time where the business community might have an opportunity to step in and partner with a school and make some big changes very quickly.
And we've talked about that quite a bit, that community extension. And I'm really interested in, you talked about Normal, Illinois the other day, Kelsey, and sort of this notion of, there are people who probably have lived in that community for much longer than any student is going to live in that community, obviously, even if the student goes for their undergrad, their grad, their whatever it is. Is it the community that forms the culture of the institution, or the institution that forms the culture of the community? Is a student signing up to be part of that community, or is the community signing up to be part of that student's life? I wonder how that should go moving forward.
Whoever's louder, right?
Right.
Yeah, I was like, ask the residents of the city of Berkeley that question
Yeah.
and see what answer you get versus the city of Normal.
Because there's something charming about these towns and these cities and what they do to contribute. I'm in Philadelphia, and part of what you pride yourself on in being in Philadelphia is that as an urban institution, the education, the experiential learning that is available to you, not just beyond the classroom, but beyond the walls of campus, in terms of being in a diverse, large urban center, is something that's an important component of the educational experience. And there's always this sort of tug and push and pull. And so I wonder if any of that has room for growth or change in the future, sort of the relationship between the two entities.
So it makes me think that really isn't one right answer to your question. Might be giving a political
As
answer to
often
this,
is the case. Yeah.
but I actually made a note when we were talking a little bit and bringing the bureaucracy to um, the retail partner and the campus, but let's add the community into it. It feels like it's an opportunity to actually bring multiple players and partners to the table and decide what the future looks like, and to do this in an intentional way. Because I think the values and the culture of the community, the surrounding community, the value and culture of the campus are probably close to alignment, but are they in alignment? Do they want it to look different, better, change? So have those conversations. I think we're in a time and place where the empathy is higher for others. And so how do you actually have a conversation that says, hey, have we been the partner? Have we shown up together for our community at large the way we want to show up together?
Hmm.
And move with what you maybe find out, and bring, if there's some key businesses to your community, bring those players to the table too. So now you have the city or town, you have the university, you have the retail involvement. So have a conversation, like, what do you want it to look like, and how do we want to work together going forward? Because I think then it's on the onus of the university of how they're running RFPs. It's on the companies of how they're responding and what they're bringing to the table. It's on the city and the towns to be welcoming and inviting to those students that are coming in and out of their town, because it does bring a different life. So how is this, you know, more community based for the greater good of the future generation?
And you're really hitting on the one overarching theme that's touched every single episode, which is silos need to be broken down, right? You can't write an RFP over in purchasing that isn't thoughtful about the student experience. It just isn't going to work anymore, or at least it's not going to be the most effective way to move forward any longer as we go. And Matt, I don't want you to necessarily give away any secret sauce, but as people are thinking about how do we progress in this new world, what advice do you give campus professionals who are thinking about, okay, well, how do I approach retail on my campus? How do I approach writing an RFP moving forward? What sort of different things do I need to keep in mind that aren't in my playbook today?
Well, they should call us,
Sure,
obviously.
of
So
course.
first answer.
Right, that's the
That's the
easy
easiest
one.
one, right?
Right. Good
Right.
product
Call
placement. I
Kelsey.
appreciate that.
They should be talking to people. No, but there's a real level of talking to folks in the industry that are doing business. They should be talking to their peers. You know, for as much as we talk about the challenges of higher ed and the bureaucratic nature, higher ed makes big changing decisions, and they do it at an institutional level. And when their peers see them do it, those institutions then have huge influence. So talking to their peers and seeing some of those changes that are taking place is really important. But the real thing is being flexible. You know, we're all, Kelsey said something that's, to me, I've been thinking about since she said it, which is the empathy in this moment is really special, right? And we're going to see that influence decision making, I think, across the board in the business world. And the biggest challenge for retailers is how to operate like the group they see themselves being in the future. And when you have retailers that are dealing with thin margins and fighting for every month so that they can pay their employees and move things forward, I mean, it's a challenging business. And the world of retail in any of the categories, right? Health and wellness, beauty, for any of those institutions or any of those organizations working with an institution, it's a big lift. And so universities, by and large, I think the best thing they can do is try and be as flexible as possible, try and listen as much as they can, and more importantly, identify the partners that you view as aligning with your core values. If an institution can pick that right group at the beginning, everything else falls into place.
Well, and I think in addition to the core values piece, well, of course, hiring MSC, but also when you think about the core values piece, I think it's also about thinking comprehensively about the campus, right? I think it feels from the inside looking out oftentimes that we make decisions based on, well, that person owns that space and they're making the decision on it, instead of as a campus, here's what we value, here's what we're trying to do, and here's a puzzle piece here and a puzzle piece here and a puzzle piece here that advances that effort, whether it be about situated learning, whether it be about revenue, whatever the goal is, everybody being in that together.
Yeah, and I mean, Kelsey, I'm sure that you see this every day with your partner institutions as well as partner businesses. When you get the right decision makers at the table, those conversations happen quickly, right? But it's identifying who those people are and making sure that everyone is aligned in the focus going forward. And I think the real opportunity coming out of this is going to be how to get not only institutions and the larger business community, but these communities together to bring things forward that otherwise may not have been possible, or that have left a community because of the reality of COVID.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it comes back to, uh, you know, what's the intent of a residential or in-person learning experience
Mm,
from its inception, right? So this idea of it is a place for learning and growth and opportunity. And so how are we getting back to those roots in some ways with additional partners at the table to move forward with that, to keep that underlying, we're here for this learning and this growth experience, right? We're not here because I built the fanciest building and now I get to own it
right.
and I get to control who comes in, not you, but them, right? So how is it that it gets to reshape back to the core of learning, growing, developing, bettering the community, and doing that with more partners at the table?
You just wrote our mission statement. Scott Galloway's been actually talking an awful lot about that from NYU on his show and on the pod about higher ed has essentially lost their way. And
Mhm.
this is a huge wake-up call to sort of return to, as you said, to our roots. What are we all about, and how do we do that? And the metaphor he made the other day was, saying that we turned away 92% of our applicants is like a homeless shelter saying we turned away this many people last night, and being happy about that. And we've almost reversed the role of higher education to say it's not about the public good anymore. And so I couldn't agree with you more about getting back to the roots. I think that's well said. So let no crisis go wasted. What are our opportunities in this? And specifically, I don't like to think in the immediate. I do like to think long term. But for right now, what I'd hate to see happen, and I think higher education's doing this right now, they're putting a bunch of band-aids on saying, if I can get through period X, Y, or Z, I can get back to quote unquote normal. I don't want to get back to normal. I think this is an opportunity to really restructure some of the things we do to be better as an industry, to be better for our students and for the communities that we serve. So what can we do now in this weird time as people are really focused on getting back to normal? What are the things we could do to set us up for a better future?
I'll go first, Kelsey, unless you want to
Yeah,
go first.
go ahead.
I think the biggest
Chivalrous of
thing,
you.
I think the biggest thing for folks in our world, right, in our small sphere of this conversation, which is really the commercial ground floor retail experience, is there's a real opportunity to bring partners to the table that otherwise may not have looked at an institution as a place where they necessarily want to be locating a business, right? There's a lot of challenges in operating a business on and around the college campus. There's a seasonality as it relates to the customer base. There's a partner that you're going to inherently have to work with at an institutional level that brings a lot of great things to the table, but also brings some baggage. And traditionally, the commercial world has wanted to go on their own. They've wanted to plant a flag, buy a building, go into a grocer anchored center and do their thing and be unobstructed by the realities of how to operate a business in and around a college campus. And I think the real opportunity here for institutions is going to be able to say, we want to stand up and bring these type of partners to our campus. And we're going to create these types of opportunities for businesses, which is going to improve our student experience. We're going to have a small format grocer. We're going to work on an incubator space with fill in the blank group. We're going to provide opportunities for education through these locations. We're going to provide opportunities for businesses to experiment. We're going to let them come in. We're going to allow the business partners to fail. We're going to allow them to see what works. And they're going to do it with these people that want to work for them, that want to buy their product, and that identify with them. And I think that opportunity for institutions, if folks on the higher ed side can figure that out, is going to be one of the things that can help differentiate the values of some of these places going forward.
Well said.
Yeah, hard to follow, but I will agree with that. And I add, I think it's the opportunity for universities to not stand in institutions to not stand in their own way. Because I agree with you, TJ, this idea of back to normal or the new, it's how about just what is it that we want to be in the future? If we really say we're an innovative campus, well, so innovate. Innovate, what does that mean? And how do you do that? And I love what you said about allowing the business partners to fail, because to me, we need to get away from it's just about the business partner paying to be here or the money that they bring to the table. It's about this holistic experience. And if we can focus on the holistic experience, everyone will win in the end, especially the students and what they learn and the companies and what they learn. And then the money's going to come, right? People are going to spend money in what they believe in. That will happen.
It's the Simon Sinek piece. People will not follow what you do; they'll follow why you do it. And Vygotsky would call what you said, Matt, situated learning. If we're focused on situated learning and we really implement everything in that way, it'll work. We'll be successful. We just have to get away from all the bureaucracy and the other things that have got put layers between us being able to do that. Fantastic. Well, I say this every week. No podcast is good after 30 minutes, and this one actually might be, but we got to cut it off. I appreciate both of you making the time. Thanks for being our placemakers this week. Next week, we're going to have an amazing conversation with Julie Payne Kirchmeyer and with Josie Alquist about the future of student affairs. We're going to battle it out as we think about online student engagement, face-to-face student engagement, and what that could look like in the future. For now, we thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks and good night.